we're doing the same thing. I'm a very routine person. I like consistency. So raise your hand if you read the Bible this week and prayed, had some kind of time with God throughout the week. All right. Basically, I saw everyone's hand slightly, which is awesome. Subin did like the quickest hand raise I've ever seen in my life. And that's why I'm going to call on her this week, Subin. So please share with us what last week's message was about. That's what happens when your hand is raised for 0.2 seconds like it was. What was last week's message about? What did you get out of last week's message? Anything you could share with us? Something about disciples. Okay. All right. Very generic. Okay. All right. So another thing, and I added a third thing that we're going to do, a spiritual interaction, communication, a opportunity to witness. And I'm going to call people this week. I'm calling Ellie because she was going to come to the social event and now she's not coming. So because of that, she's getting called on for this. Okay, any kind of spiritual interaction or opportunity to witness. And the reason I'm doing this, while Ellie thinks, while I give her some time to think, is I really want you guys to challenge yourself and try to do it. And try to have those conversations. Try to challenge yourself to have those conversations, to witness to others, because unless you're doing that and challenging yourself, you won't do it. And so that's why I want to do this, because it's something that once I started talking about it more, I'm also challenging myself more. So Ellie, I gave you some time to think, so please share with us. Thank you for sharing, and exactly. So I'm going to start calling again every week. Try to challenge yourself. I think first and foremost, it's having spiritual conversations and challenging yourself with believers, right? Like Ellie did with Kyungwon. And then the next step is kind of doing it with those that don't believe. And I think that's like the next step. It's more difficult, but I think something that I think through 2021 I want us to get to. A couple announcements. 3 o'clock, we have the Zoom event, the social event. So here's the update on the prizes, because that's the main driving factor for me. So there's four $20 gift cards available. So let me explain. So you could each person could potentially win 2 of them. So the max you could win is 2. So there's going to be 2 games. So in each game, there's 2 winners. So 2 people will get the $20 gift cards. Okay. Then we're gonna have another game. So let's say that Jesse won and Sergey won. So that first game they won, okay? The second game, they could potentially win again. So if they win again, they would only have 2 winners, but they would both get two $20 gift certificates each. So there's a potential for, say it again. Yes, exactly. So there's double incentive. Once I heard the double incentive, I was preparing this morning with my fingers to see how I could draw in this Pictionary. All right, the next thing is small groups this week. Make sure you go to your groups. Yes, question. Amazon for now. All right. So small groups this week. Please attend, or please let your leaders know that you're not attending. Let me give you a sad example of what happened last week. Chris was waiting for her small group people. She was on Zoom. She had her Bible ready. She had her notes ready, and nobody signed in. So that's very sad, right? That's a waste of her time. It's also kind of a sad visual. So please try to attend. That's the best if possible. But if not, definitely let them know. And I think that's just courtesy, because people are planning their whole afternoon or evening, with that assumption in mind, so keep that. So please, please, please. All right, so that's all for the announcements for now. We have a couple birthdays next week, so we'll talk about that next week. All right, so today we're talking about Matthew 11, 1 through 19, and we're talking about John the Baptist. And John the Baptist we'll talk a little bit more about him, but in order to kind of understand a little bit more about John the Baptist, I want you to please, again, another poll. We have a lot of polls now because I want some engagement. Raise your right hand if when you think about camping, it's a positive thing. And raise your left hand if you think about camping, it's a negative thing. So let's say someone, your family's like, oh, we're going camping. We're going to sleep in a tent. Raise your right hand if that is something you would be excited about. A left hand if that's something you would not want to do. So I need everyone's hands out. Let's see. Got some right hands here. Oh, a lot of right hands. Some left. I think the older people are more left hand. The younger are right. Okay. On July 4th, 2019, I decided that I will never go camping again. I hate camping. It was raining. It was 4th of July. It was muddy. I got a splinter from the tent that I couldn't get out for hours, which was very disruptive. I had like a cushion that I bought that you blow up with air, and then my pump didn't work, but then I asked for a pump, and then we blew it up, and then it deflated within a couple hours. There was just a lot that happened. July 4th, 2019 is the day that I said that I will never camp again. But for some of you guys like to camp. And the reason I'm bringing that up is, John the Baptist, I don't think we know a lot. I don't think we talk enough about John the Baptist. And today, in listening to the message, I kind of had to figure some stuff out for myself about him as well. So John the Baptist he's not John the disciple. So I think some people don't even know that, right? So Jesus had 12 disciples. One of them was John. John the Baptist is not the disciple John. So first of all, that's clear. You have to make that clear. Number two, the book of John is not written by John the Baptist. So again, there's a differentiation there. And he was a very interesting guy. And the reason I brought up the camping stuff is if you look in Matthew 3:4, it says that he was clothed in camel's hair. I mean, that seems very uncomfortable. I don't know exactly what that looks like. And that he lived in the desert and he ate locusts and honey. So just John the Baptist in that way was a very interesting person. And the only way, I don't know if anyone here can even relate to that, because even camping itself wouldn't be a fair comparison to it. The only way that I could compare, first of all, I don't like camping, so I don't have that many camping examples, but we did a mission trip to Panama. This was a long time. I was in high school. So it was me, my brother, Joshua, and then some other people who no longer come to our church. But there was someone named Susan, who some of you remember. There was, who else went? And then a guy named Mingyu, who some of you guys remember too. But we went to Panama, and we were in this kind of remote village. And the last day that we were there, or that we were supposed to be there, the whole village burned down. It was very traumatic and very scary and very crazy. And I mean, it was very, very quick too. It was like we were sleeping and then we just hear this dog barking. We're like, why is that dog barking? It's so annoying. So we went out to look, and then we slept in like these real tents. I mean, not tents, sorry, huts, like grass huts. And it was on fire. And then like within probably an hour, like 200 of them were on fire, and because everything was so dry and moved very, very quickly. So that night we actually had to sleep outside. We slept, and the fire kept going, so we kind of had to sleep by the water. So we slept on these rocks, I remember, by the water. Nothing, everything was burned. We literally only had the clothes that we were wearing, and our book bags, which just like had our toothbrushes and stuff like that. So we slept on the rocks that night, and it was scary and it was super uncomfortable, and I can't imagine like living in the desert. That's the only comparison I can have. And it was one night, it was very tragic, and I'll never forget it. But that's kind of how John the Baptist, he lived in the desert. He ate locusts, he ate honey, so he lived kind of off the ground. But if you look at how Jesus describes John the Baptist, it's incredible. Even if in the verses that we look at, right? In verse 9, in Matthew 11, verse 9, it says, he is more than a prophet. And in verse 11, it says, no one greater on earth than John the Baptist. I thought that was incredible. That imagine that Jesus describes you in that way, that there is no one greater on earth than you, you know. And you can compare it maybe to your school or your work. Imagine if your boss said, man, I've never had a greater worker ever in my life than Chehan, you know. That would be an incredible honor to say, right? Or if your student or if your teacher was like, man, I've never, you know, had a greater student ever before. And so that's something that's a really high praise. And even in Luke, it describes John the Baptist being born. It was a prophecy that John the Baptist was going to be born. And this is how they describe John the Baptist, that he's going to bring joy and delight to many people, and that he will be great in the eyes of the Lord, or in the eyes of God. And so imagine that kind of description. So that's who John the Baptist was. And in fact, when John the Baptist and Jesus was alive, Jesus actually went to John the Baptist to get baptized by water, and that you see that in Matthew 3. So if Jesus is coming to you and asking you to baptize him, imagine like the spiritual strength you have, imagine the leadership, imagine what Jesus thought of you. And so that is a big thing. So John the Baptist, you know, we hear right away, he was a very, very renowned person. He had a lot of followers. And so Jesus really, really, you know, raised him up. But the second point, and I thought this was very interesting, in the same verse, in verse 11, where it says that there was no one greater on earth, he compares this to heaven. I thought this was so interesting. I had to read it like 5 times because I was not sure why he said this, and it was almost like insulting, right? He says, first, he's like, no one greater on earth, but then he says, there is no one less than him in heaven. So what that means is he's saying John the Baptist is the greatest person on earth, but he's the least person in heaven. So I had to read that a couple times. So I'll try to clarify it again. The greatest person on earth, yet the least person in heaven. And so I was kind of thinking, and Pastor talked about today, why is that? You know, why do we have that kind of dichotomy? Because that sounds weird to me, right? Like, if he's the greatest person on earth, according to Jesus, he should also be renowned in heaven, right? He should at least be in the middle, an average person. But it says he's the least in heaven. And, you know, I think it's for a couple reasons. Number one, I think it was just to make it very clear that while John the Baptist was the greatest on earth, he's still a human. And the reason why that's so important is because there were a lot of people at that time who weren't sure who Jesus was, who weren't sure who John the Baptist was. They were thinking, you know, is John the Baptist actually the Messiah? You know, or is Jesus the Messiah? They weren't sure. Some people thought that he was actually a reincarnation of Elijah. So Elijah was another prophet. They thought that John the Baptist was Elijah who had come back to life. And so some people thought of him in that way. And he had a lot of followers as well. And so a lot of people really believed everything that John the Baptist said. So I think Jesus says that, number one, to kind of show that while he is great on earth, he's still a human. And John the Baptist knew that too. In Luke 3:16, he says, you know, I baptize with water, but there will be someone greater than I who baptizes by the Holy Spirit. And he was talking about Jesus. And then I think the second reason that, you know, Jesus puts that dichotomy is to give believers some strength and courage. Because what's going to happen is, as you guys know, Jesus would be crucified and Jesus would resurrect and go to heaven and no longer be on earth. But Jesus had followers, right? That first church, imagine the first church. I think it's hard for us to imagine, but basically you have this leader, Jesus, you're following, you believe. He's crucified and killed and he leaves. And now you're kind of left without a leader. You're persecuted, right? Jesus was killed. He was crucified. It wasn't he died of natural causes. And yet your goal and your role is to spread the gospel to people who are still alive, or to people at that time. So I think he was saying that to give people strength that, you know, if you follow Jesus on earth, if you do what Jesus commands on earth, then you're going to be even greater than John the Baptist in heaven. And I think that was to give people strength, because the rest of the time it was going to be difficult. You know, it wasn't going to be easy. People who lived in that first church, it was difficult. They had to meet in secret, you know, and that's why we talk about Tarakbang, where that, you know, that's where that comes from, is that first church, they didn't meet in a place like this, right? They didn't meet in a place that has air conditioning. They often met in attics. They met in basements. They met in these places that they had to hide. And so I think he gives that dichotomy to show that, you know, if we follow Jesus and we do what Jesus commands, then we'll be even greater. We'll have even greater reward than John the Baptist in heaven. And that's kind of the last point that we have today, is as believers of Jesus Christ, right? We're baptized by the Holy Spirit. We say that we have received salvation. You know, who are we on this earth? Like, how are we living? How are we serving God? And how are we being portrayed on earth? Not only to other non-believers, but to Jesus. You know, when God looks at you, right? When God looks at you, when he looks at, you know, does he say, man, this is someone who is pleasing to me? Is this someone who is a great person here on earth? Or does he look at you in your life and say, man, this person is my child and is following me, but, you know, I'm not really proud of the things that they do, or they're not really living for me, you know? So that's one of the challenges too, is when God sees you, how does he see you? And how do we live, right? Are we people who are really, you know, we talked about this, the pastor talked about this. Are we people that are holding on to assurance of salvation, of forgiveness, of answers to prayer, of guidance and victory? Are we holding on to those things, or are we just Christians who just live our life? We don't have any spiritual power. We don't, you know, do any evangelism. We don't read the Bible. We don't pray. We don't have a relationship really with God other than the salvation part. So the big thing that we talked about at the end is, you know, if we truly believe we're baptized by the Holy Spirit, if we truly believe we're children of God and we have amazing rewards in heaven, how are we living, you know, on earth? And I want you guys to hold on to that. And I want you to think about that is, you know, when God looks at you, right? Because at the end of your life, everyone's like, and not just on a worldly standpoint, but on a spiritual standpoint. It doesn't matter what your family did. It doesn't matter, you know, what your parents did for you, or what your church did, or what your company did. It's going to matter what you do, right? Whether it be in a worldly sense, what did you accomplish in this earth? You know, what impact did you have in people's life? Or on a spiritual sense, what was your relationship like? Were you serving Jesus Christ? Were you living for the Spirit? Were you being blessed by the Spirit? So I really want you to hold on to those things and kind of challenge yourself. I think 2021 for me has been really a year. I think 2020 was really tough, right? I think it's still tough, but it was honestly like a survival year, right? Let me just get through this grade. Let me just not get sick at work. Let me just hopefully lose nobody at work. And a lot of people who work, their bonuses were cut off, or any kind of promotions were slowed down. At a lot of hospitals, they had what's called a hiring freeze, which meant they just weren't hiring any doctors because they weren't sure what's going to happen. That was 2020. But 2021, I think one big thing for me is challenging myself. What am I doing on this earth, right? What am I doing to serve God? And I think it's something that I want you guys to take hold of as well. How are you guys living your life, right? How is God looking at you? What impact are you having on those around you? What impact are you having to those who don't know Jesus Christ? So with that said, let's spend a few minutes now in prayer. Then we'll go into our forum groups, and then we'll close today.